Hello friends, welcome to E-Pathshala. I am Shagun Sharma. I am Assistant Professor in Political Science in Government College for Girls, Sector 42, Chandigarh. The paper is Foreign Policy of India and the module is India-USSR relation. India-USSR relations are a great point of interest in the field of international relations. Though Indo-Soviet Union friendship started a little late, but then it gradually grew from a partnership to an all-weather friendship. Initially, since India was a member of Commonwealth and India favored the policy of non-alignment, it did not go too well with Stalin's regime. However, gradually, India-Russia friendship became more closer. After various defense deals and after various developmental projects in which Russia invested in India, the friendship between India and Russia came to new heights. In fact, India was the first country to support Russia and to recognize it after the disintegration of Soviet Union. Through this module, an effort will be made to apprise the students about the true nature of India-USSR relationship and how these legacies brought this continuity ahead in the Indo-Russian ties. It is a well-known fact that a country's foreign policy does not evolve all of a sudden. Rather, it is a product of numerous factors and forces. Bilateral ties between India and USSR and Russia are no exception to this phenomenon. The demise of USSR had created most serious challenge for India, not only for its close ties, but also from strategic and economic point of view. Russian Federation was emerging as the natural successor of Soviet legacies. There was an utmost need for India to repair relations with Russia, as former still had important stakes there. Therefore, it becomes imperative to understand and evaluate this complicated scenario. Besides, this is also important to know about the issues of convergences and divergences in these years. By doing so, one can analyze the real nature of this relationship. For a better understanding of this issue, in the beginning, effort is made to analyze the Indo-USSR ties in this historical background, and after that, emerging Indo-Russian relations are discussed in detail. Various phases of Indo-USSR relations. India was having historical ties with Soviet Union. In the pre-independence period, Nehru himself expressed desire to work with Soviet leadership during his visit to USSR in 1927. He was very impressed with Russian Revolution of 1917 and by planned economic development without any imperialistic tendency. Indian national movement was also influenced by the Soviet ideology. After India got independence, USSR was the natural choice for bilateral relationship. In this background, Indo-Soviet ties will be analyzed. Beginning with Contradiction and Suspicion. India and USSR had the common perception on the issues of international politics in post-World War II period. It was perceptible that India and Soviet Union would like to develop their bilateral relations on this envisaged line. After India got independence in 1947, this positive gesture was completely altered due to a variety of reasons. The Indo-USSR ties could not develop in desired direction in the initial years. India got freedom from British imperialism after a long battle. It was predicated that India would like to keep distance from country like Britain. But Indian leadership had decided to stay with the membership of Commonwealth due to economic and strategic reasons. It caused irritation and suspicion in communist bloc. Soviet leadership took it strategically and kept distance from India. After the Second World War, India had decided to remain non-aligned at that juncture. It again aggravated the situation and created doubts in Soviet minds more than of Western world. Close cooperation. After the death of Stalin, new regime under the leadership of Khrushchev had followed the policy of improving their relation with third world countries. His doctrine of peaceful coexistence had made Soviet ideology much flexible regarding third world countries. It had brought some type of relief in Indo-USSR contradictory stands. Both the countries now started to cooperate on bilateral issues. After the demise of Khrushchev, Indo-Soviet ties showed some reluctance, but never reached to the point of any serious dissent. On the following issues, both India and Soviet Union showed common understanding and strengthened the bilateral ties. In Indo-Pak War of 1965, Soviet leadership had remained neutral on most of the issues and tried to maintain balance between both countries. Prime Minister Kosygin had managed to sit both countries together for peaceful settlement of this issue. It resulted in Tashkent Agreement between India and Pakistan. Trade and economic ties between India and Soviet Union also started to grow in this period. Establishment of Bhilai steel plant, payment of trade in rupees, use of atomic energy for peaceful activities, and trade growth were the features of these emerging ties. Few irritants like Suez Canal crisis, Hungary's intervention, crisis of Czechoslovakia, supply of arms to Pakistan, and Sino-Indian War were occurred in these days, where these ties testified. But the Indo-Soviet ties remained intact despite these problems. Cordial friendship and partnership. This period proved to be the decider of very sound relationship between India and Soviet Union. Some important initiatives were taken in this period. India and Soviet Union had signed the Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation for 20 years. This treaty became the fundamental base for the Indo-Soviet ties in coming days. Political leadership had also played an important role in consolidation of close ties. In most of infrastructural industries, Soviet Union was ready to provide economic and technical assistance. Both the countries had prepared the list of 51 industries where a fruitful partnership could be attained. Besides, India launched its first ever satellite Aryabhat from Soviet Space Center. In the later years, Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko, President Podgorny and Prime Minister Kosygin had also visited India. From Indian side, Prime Minister Morarji Desai and Foreign Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee were on the list of reciprocal visits. All these initiatives had strengthened the bilateral Indo-USSR ties in positive direction. Some roadblocks were also there in between the bilateral relations. Brezhnev's doctrine of the collective security of Asia, rupee-ruble parity rates, problem of Kampuchea and Vietnam, and Soviet intervention in Afghanistan were the key issues that created some problems in India-Soviet ties. Continuity with slight changes. The decade of 80 had brought some type of stagnation in bilateral relations between India and Soviet Union. Yet basic parameter remained intact till the demise of USSR. There were two main reasons behind the situation. India's approach towards Soviet intervention in Afghanistan was not taken cordially by Soviet leadership. India took the stand of neutrality and gave emphasis on the recall of Soviet army from Afghanistan without any delay. This rattled the Soviet thinking about India. The Prime Minister of India, Srimati Indira Gandhi, wanted to show some distance from Soviet policy, especially on the issue of Afghanistan. Besides, she wanted to retain India's non-aligned posture in third world countries. It created some confusion in the Soviet bloc. Despite these issues, the bilateral ties took its own course and remained continued in economic and defense partnership. During the regime of Gorbachev, these bilateral ties showed continuities, yet changed international scenario had begun to influence the bilateral ties. Besides, Soviet Union had also become ready to transfer MiG-31 fighter planes and atomic energy-based marines to India. Again, President Gorbachev visited India in 1988. Prime Minister of India VP Singh visited USSR in 1990. Both the countries decided to renew the 1971 Indo-Soviet Treaty for a further period of 20 years. Gorbachev's doctrine of glasnost and perestroika paved the way to the end of Cold War strategies. The changed relations of two superpowers and recall of Soviet army from Afghanistan had decreased the Cold War tension in political sphere. But it created a problem for India in strategic outfield. There was no space for India in this new Soviet approach. But this approach also led to the end of communist system in USSR and finally resulted in sudden disintegration of mighty Soviet Union. It pushed India in a situation of confusion and contradictions as it had lost a close ally, guarantor, and warm friend. This entire scenario made India to rethink about its foreign policy and international relations. Main irritants occurred in this scenario were trade imbalance in favor of India, issue of rupee-ruble value, money deficit, and demand of dollars for payment in this last phase. The India-USSR ties from early 1947 to 91 had showed a mature understanding between the two despite some contradictions of short-type nature. India had developed a kind of relationship that it did not have with any other country in bilateral relations. Both the countries had close ties in political, economic, and defense spheres and remained intact till the demise of Soviet Union. Various phases of Indo-Russia relations. With the sudden demise of Soviet Union, international politics had seen dramatic scenario that no one could thought for a while before. Although 11 republics formed a new system of Commonwealth independent states but failed to work under a collective government or policy. Ultimately, all the republics started to function as independent state in domestic as well as external front. Russian Federation had emerged as the successor of erstwhile Soviet Union due to its size, population, natural resources, strategic location, and nuclear capabilities. That's why UNO has granted the veto power status to Russia in place of former USSR with its inception in 1991. India found this sudden happening very difficult to cope up with. The former had lost one-time great strategic partner with the demise of Soviet Union. India had to rebuild its strategic ties in this new emerging perspective. India had started this new beginning immediately. India was among the first countries to recognize Russia as independent country and natural successor of former USSR. After that, both the countries had shown greater common understanding in bilateral ties as well as on the issues of international politics. Reciprocal visits of political leaders and army personnel and strategic economic and political initiatives taken in these years explain the real picture of bilateral Indo-Russian relationship. The following factors demand a common understanding between the two countries. Both India and Russia have regional importance and natural attraction. Both the countries have mutual stakes in Central Asia and other republics. Shared perceptions regarding Muslim radicalism, ethnic problem, and external intervention in these republics. Role of multinational companies in this area and their policy of exploration of natural resources. These were the main issues where both the countries found themselves on same side and needed bilateral understanding to cope with. Both India and Russia had done a lot to revive their relationship in this post-Cold War period. For better understandings, it will be better to analyze these relations in two broad spectrums. From sticky start to strategic cooperation, and from strategic cooperation to strategic partnership. From sticky start to strategic cooperation, the Indo-Russian ties began with contradictory approach. Soviet leadership under Boris Yeltsin was busy in its internal politics. Different organs headed towards contrary directions created chaotic phase. Besides, on the foreign policy front, they adopted a cautious approach seeking better relationships from all over the world. This stance decreased the importance of traditional stakeholders in Russian thinking. Russia had required US help in internal as well as external politics. Their foreign policy orientation followed these objectives. All these happenings had great ramifications for old traditional ally India. Political immaturity had also created some type of confusion in initial relationship. Russia decided to export arms and weapons to Pakistan and took initiatives for better friendship and cooperation with that. Besides, on Kashmir issue, their approach contradicted from prior stance. This changed stance had reflected from the visit of the Vice President Alexander Rutskoy to Pakistan. His observations regarding Kashmir and nuclear-free zone in South Asia rattled the Indian side. It created some tense moments in Indian mindset. India protested strongly, although Russian embassy clarified its unaltered stand on Kashmir by official statement. After that, both sides had tried to resolve all these contradictions and looked for warm relationship. It was reflected in the reciprocal visits of political leaders. Gennady Burbulis, Foreign Secretary of State of Russia, was the first dignitary from Russia who broke the deadlock in his visit to India in March 1992. The main agreements signed were 4-year economic and trade agreement, status of most favored nation state to each other, establishment of joint industrial undertakings, assurance of delivery of cryogenic engine for much ambitious GSLV program. During the visit of Defense Minister Sharad Pawar, Russian counterpart had proposed the bilateral agreement for the smooth supply of spare parts and hardware for military requirements. The chairman of Supreme Soviet, Khashbalatov, asserted India first-class economic power and endorsed Russian desire to continue good relations with India. With the visit of President Boris Yeltsin in January 1993, all the doubts cleared off regarding Indo-Russia close ties. A new 14-clause treaty similar to historic 1971 Indo-Soviet Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation was signed. Yeltsin proposed not only hurdle-free supply of defense hardware and spare parts, but also ready-to-sell T-80U tanks and MiG fighter planes. Russian leader also gave assurance to stop the supply of MiG-29 fighter planes to Pakistan. Reciprocal visits of Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Prime Minister H.D. Deve Gowda also further consolidated these emerging Indo-Russian ties. Russia took both these visits with higher priority and gave warm welcome to Indian leaders, despite prior engagement in Helsinki conferences. This was evident from the following facts. Russia gave its consent to establish nuclear power reactor in India, assured India the delivery of cryogenic engines, 4 agreements related to commercial tie-up, persuade Ukraine not to export T-80 tanks to Pakistan, Russia in principle became ready to transfer technological assistance for the development of missile program Akash. In the shadow of Indian nuclear test in 1998, Russian Prime Minister visited India, but Russia's response was quite mature and fully asserted towards India's stand. Both countries signed seven agreements in the fields of defense, trade, economic, industry, science, communication, and air transport. Russia also gave consent to sell Gorshkov warhead carrier to India. Despite all the difficulties in political and strategic sphere, economic ties between both remained unaffected most of the time. From 1991 to 1997, trade between India and Russia had shown 300% growth. Trade protocols were signed to enhance new areas of cooperation and collaboration by the two countries during these years. From strategic cooperation to strategic partnership, Indo-Russia relationship had shown great maturity in the new century. The visit of President Vladimir Putin had institutionalized the bilateral ties. Both India and Russia had signed an agreement for strategic partnership. This strategic partnership was clearly evident because of India's emergence as economic power in 21st century. Indo-Russian ties grow steadily. Mutual understanding on the regional as well as on world scenario. No serious conflict on the nuclear issue. Convergence on the security issue. This convergence had created the environment for the cooperation in the field of political, economic, defense, science and technology, and culture for a long period. This goodwill gesture could be analyzed after reviewing initiatives taken by both countries in these directions. India and Russian relationship had begun in the 21st century with a high note. Visits of political leaders, agreements, and common understanding have paved the way for smooth ties. Russian President Vladimir Putin visited India in October 2000, December 2002, 2010, and 2014 for the sake of better political interaction. From Indian side, Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee paid state visit to Russia in 2001 and 2003. Defense ministers of Russia, Igor Ivanov, visited India in 2002 and his counterpart from Indian side, George Fernandez, visited in 2003 respectively. In April 2013, two ministers of India, Home Minister Sushil Kumar Shinde and Commerce and Industrial Minister Anand Sharma, visited Russia. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited India in November 2013. These visits created an environment of warm relations. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh also visited Russia in December 2009 and October 2013. Various deals and agreements were signed in the sphere of political, economic, and cultural relationship. The warmth in their bilateral ties was maintained and sustained with the institutionalization of mechanism for bilateral interaction. The meets at summit level annually, Intergovernmental Commission on Military Technical Cooperation, Intergovernmental Commission on Trade, Economic, Scientific, Technological and Cultural Cooperation, and India-Russia Trade and Investment Forum are the institutional mechanisms which are providing opportunity to explore all the available opportunities for bilateral benefits. So far, 14th annual summits have taken place alternatively in India and Russia. India and Russia have signed the Treaty of Strategic Partnership during the visit of President Putin in 2000. Based on the earlier treaties of 1991-93 and Moscow Declaration of 1994. It committed the two countries to no participation in any military, political, or other alliances or associations or armed conflicts directed against the other side or in any treaties, agreements or understandings infringing upon the independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity or national security interests of the other side. This agreement gave Indo-Russian ties a great boost up in contemporary times. Besides, on the issue of New World Order, democratization of United Nations Security Council, nuclear disarmament and improvement in international financial institutions, both the countries showed common understanding in these years. On the issues of terrorism, Afghanistan crisis and security problem in Central Asia, both India and Russia shared common perspective and dealt the situation with joint strategy many times. Cooperation in defense sector is always proved the backbone of Indo-Russian ties. During the visit of President Putin in 2000, both countries signed the agreement of the delivery of heavy weapons costing $3 billion. Russia also gave its consent to deliver Admiral Gorshkov warhead carrier and T-90 tanks as early as possible. Besides, Russia also agreed to supply atomic fuel for nuclear power project despite US sanctions. Both the countries are engaged in cooperation in space technology also. India and Russia are the members of BRICS, RIC, G20 and hence collaborating at global level. Russia is also the supporter of India's inclusion in UNSC as permanent member and membership of SCO. These are the positive trends in contemporary Indo-Russia relationship. The economic sphere did not show much enthusiasm like political and strategic interaction. Trade between India and Russia from 2001 to 2007-8 has shown slight growth as it reached from $1387 million to $3408 million, but much below to expected line. In the year of 2010-11, the total trade showed further growth as it reached $5289. In 2014-15, the total trade ended up on $6,346 and showing some type of continuity in Indo-US trade relations. It was expected that after the opening of new transit route via Iran to Russia, trade activities will also show steady growth. Besides this, Indian public sector undertaking has been working in Russia from the beginning. ONGC Videsh, state-owned Indian oil and gas agency, has also been collaborating with Russian counterpart for a long time. Both the countries are now trying hard to improve economic ties. This is evident from President Putin's visit to India in December 2014. Total 20 pacts of US $100 billion were signed mainly in the nuclear energy sector. This agreement had the great importance for both sides. Fulfillment of energy demands for economic growth is the highest priority for India. On the other side, Russia got the slighter edge in ongoing competition with other contenders. India and Russia had improved their relation a lot in last few years, but far below from potential. The main roadblocks occurred between the two countries in these years are political immaturity on the issue of Kashmir, rupee-ruble parity rates, Indian debt cut-off dates, supply of cryogenic engine and American pressure, spare part supply, nuclear-free zone in South Asia, and financial inadequacy. To conclude this module, we can say India and Russia have always maintained their friendship as all-weather friends. They started from economic partnership to defense partnership, and now they are allies in all weathers. India and Russia, they have together tested the time, and they have brought the bilateral treaties, they have brought the bilateral partnership to new levels. Thank you.